first of all, I really loved his book, The End of Faith. And I think the meditation stuff is important. I think, in terms of expanding the range of human potential and human creativity, I think pushing back on Islam is important, although I also think it can be a religion of peace and love. I really believe that. But Sam has a very wrong core worldview that is sort of astonishing in its simplicity and childlike kind of nature, which is what I think he calls philosophical realism. But it basically doesn't deal with any of the most important ideas of philosophical thought of the last 300 years, starting with Hume and the notion that we're actually driven by emotions and instincts, and that we're, ironically, for someone who says he's an atheist and says that we're driven by emotions and passions, he has, I think, a great overestimation of his ability to avoid being trapped in various emotionally and pride-bound arguments that have to do with his own overestimation of his abilities. And I think also is Platonic and fundamentally believes that sort of the world is apprehended by science and that the world somehow stays the same, but of course it doesn't. And so when you look at something like vaccine efficacy, my colleague Alex Gutentag is really helping me understand better, but particularly this person, Norman Fenton, has done this extraordinarily, I think, helpful explanation of how they manipulated the claims around vaccine efficacy, claiming 95% relative efficacy for vaccines that were less than 1% absolute efficacy, and never explaining the difference to people, which is just dishonest, immoral, unethical. But that those rates of efficacy change with different variants over time and with population dynamics. And so the idea that you would pre-bunk something about a vaccine's efficacy in the future to describe in the present to describe in the future is grossly unscientific. It's absolutely metaphysical. It's basically a religious view. We know what the truth is going to be next year on a fast-changing, rapidly changing virus and pandemic. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd. What's more, we simply do not decide what's good or bad based on science. Science tells us what is. Hume is correct. You cannot derive a what ought to be from an is, at least not in any sort of direct way or without some broader appeal to human morality. Human morality is complex. It's important. It exists in institutions. There's all sorts of type 1 thinking involved in it, which actually have been protective of cultures. So I think he's got a view of the world that is, I just think, just almost childlike in its simplicity and its wrongness. It's debunked. Every philosophy student in college is supposed to get rid of that stuff when they study Hume, and when they study basic philosophy and basic cognitive science. And he seems to think he's got this picture of the world that the experts are more right than wrong and more right than the public. But Philip Tetlock debunked even that, showing that expert predictions about the future are no better than the average prediction of others, which are no better than random, because we're terrible, terrible, terrible at predicting the future, because we're terrible at predicting human behavior, and we're terrible at predicting collective human behavior in the future. So I find Sam, he made an interesting polemical intervention around Islam, but since then it's honestly been scientistic, reductive, hubristic. And I think that's why he ends up finding himself taking advantage of grifters and censors.
Taking advantage of by grifters.
So that's my view. And I think it's terrible philosophy. I think it's terrible moral philosophy. It makes for absolutely authoritarian instincts from somebody who claims to be on the side of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment questions on free speech and scientific inquiry were resolved hundreds of years ago, which is that you allow wrong speech, because wrong speech, anybody that's ever been involved in science or journalism or anything, wrong speech is necessary often for getting things right. You often have to be wrong before you're right. And so we encourage wrongness. We like wrongness.
Yep.
Rant over.
So I love somebody wants to reach me, Michael.
It's UFO day around here.
Oh, goodness. So look, that's a great rant. It dovetails with a lot of the things that I've concluded about Sam myself, and I've done more thinking about him than I would like to have as a result of his very aggressive posture that he has taken towards me and Heather over the course of the pandemic.
And by the way, on that, you'll be happy on that podcast, I defended Jay Bhattacharya's honor in real time by Googling what Sam was claiming and showing that Sam was grossly misrepresenting it. Right there on the podcast.
Absolutely.
So anyway, there you go.
Somehow, Sam has become like the universe's way of teaching us about irony, right?
And the importance of humility.
The importance of humility. And also, I think he is a cautionary tale about rationalism, right? Rationalism is a lovely idea that cannot be operationalized for the human reasons that you're talking about, right? You just simply don't have that, 30,000 foot view of all of these issues from which you can purge your, emotional state and all of that. And it is Sam's belief that he can derive an is from a not, or a not from an is, that has him resulting in all of these odd places, including having Renee DiResta on his program multiple times to spread misinformation in the guise of a sense-making podcast, right? So that's an amazing fact. But again, I want to come back to not the person of Renee DiResta, but the lesson that the rest of us have to take, right? I don't know what to make of the fact. I mean, Joe Rogan is a good friend of mine, right? He's had a person who is downstream of the CIA and who has apparently been central in the process that has been censoring me and trying to censor him. That's a very complex reality to be in. It's a hall of mirrors of a level that we do not anticipate. I am now sitting here talking to you, somebody who I thought initially might be a shill for the nuclear industry, right? But having come together over other issues. So at some level, I would just say everybody needs to take the lesson of this. It's possible that people in our midst are not what they appear to be. And it is possible that people who appear not to be what they appear to be actually are what they appear to be, which is now what I take you to be, right? I take you to be an honest broker. And the reason that I think that you're an honest broker is because I've now seen you across multiple domains take a difficult stance out of what I read to be principle. So, okay, I misjudged you to begin with.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. No, you're welcome. But I guess the point is, look, a lot of people have misjudged Renee DiResta in the other direction. They have taken her to be an honest broker, and that does not appear to be the explanation for what she is. Her backstory appears to be a cover story, right?
So anyway, so much is changing, and the media are allowing the new communications technologies are allowing us to have much more interesting, richer, complex conversations that we simply were not allowed to have in the era of one-way broadcast. And it's creating all sorts of the elites are freaking out about it. They don't get to dominate public consciousness in the way that they did, and they tried to get control of social media, and they had basically achieved it until this gigantic swerve ball. Elon. Whenever I think about Elon, you kind of go, boy, throw away all the books that were written, because Lucretius, by the way, wrote this beautiful beautiful writings, the Greek philosopher, and because he was an atheist, sort of believed that that world was sort of random and that there were these swerve events. And it was sort of a really, it's important to not be deterministic and also really understand the power of the American experiment, because Elon really came out of nowhere. That is not something that you can look at the laws of history or the patterns. I mean, we were truly headed towards a very totalitarian society whereby a very small number of people, think about it. The mainstream, they got all the mainstream news media together at Aspen to quote unquote pre-bunk Hunter Biden's laptop. They had all these newspapers there, but they only really needed 2 social media platforms. So whereas you had this heterogeneity, even in the news media, suddenly you get the social media platforms and you basically have 1 or 2 that allow for the security state, the medical state, the corporate interests we now see exert this extraordinary control over these platforms. And so we came very close to that, but there was a swerve. And so I think there should be humility. Humility for me is the thing that keeps coming up, that we should all be more humble. And that's hard to do at an environment where the social media is such that it both magnifies ego and I think it reinforces dogmatism. That's part of the reason I think the left has become so dogmatic, though I don't think it entirely explains it. But I think so for me, I go, this moment is so amazing. We should be humbled by the fact that our knowledge is always temporary. There's very few eternal truths. Though the ones that we have are very important too, including, I think, some amount of humility and curiosity.